Hello everybody, and welcome back to Boss Battles of Wraeclast, the somewhat comprehensive guide to the various bosses in Path of Exile 2. In today's episode we are taking on the Rotten Druid, who can be located within the Grim Tangle. Now, the Rotten Druid is an optional boss. You don't have to kill this one, you can skip it completely if you really want to, but it does reward an uncut support gem at level 1 on normal mode, so I would recommend doing it if you're new to the game. Getting those support gems is quite powerful for some of your abilities. Now, to get to the Grim Tangle can be a bit of a run around. You will discover the entrance in Grelwood, but when you first enter, you'll notice there's a waypoint, but then there's nowhere else to go. That is because you have to complete the Rust King quest from the Red Veil, collect the 3 runic armor pieces to get the spikes from Renly back in Clearfell encampment, and then you use those spikes to release the hooded one, and then Una will bring you back here to open up the way throughout the Grim Tangle, and then you just have to explore it. Now, I would recommend being very careful whilst you're exploring the Grim Tangle. There are some enemies in here that explode into these kind of poisonous chaos damage pools on the floor, and they do hit quite hard. So be very careful when you're going through the Grim Tangle. If you notice there's a brownish yellow pool of stuff on the floor that you're stood in, get out of it. Get out of it quite quickly, because it does hit pretty hard. Anyway, without further ado, let's head on to the boss, the Rotten Druid. Okay, so with the Rotten Druid, finding him is very easy. Once you found the big circular room with the pool of poison in the middle of it with the mushrooms, you'll see him stood on one side of it. Now, he takes a few seconds to activate in the fight, so make sure you get yourself into a position. If you're melee, walk right up to him. If you're ranged, get yourself on the other side of the pool, just to make sure you've got plenty of time to avoid his attacks. Now, his basic ranged attack is the projectiles that he's firing. They will land where you are stood, but they will also land, there's 3 of them, and they will also land in kind of like an area around you. So even if you're blocking with a shield, you can still get hit by them if they land behind you, so be very careful with those 3. That's his basic ranged attack. When you're stood in melee with him, he will just start whacking you with his staff. So again, if you're using a shield, you can pretty much block it. Now, with his ranged attack, he does have a channeled version of this, in which he will summon multiple of them, and they will land where you are stood. So make sure when you see him channel and summon a lot of those projectiles, make sure you're moving out of the way and just not getting hit by them. A couple of them hitting you isn't too bad, but if you take all of them, you'll most likely die, because they do hit pretty hard. Now, one of his next attacks is a kind of reddish-brown ring that he'll summon around himself, and then after a few seconds, that ring, if you're still stood within that ring, it will teleport you into the middle of the room inside that pool of mushrooms. So you do have a few seconds to get out of that ring, but you also have a few seconds to get out of that pool of mushrooms if you do get teleported there. Sometimes it will teleport you right into the centre, sometimes it'll be on the edge, so just make sure you're moving out of the way and you can get out of those shrooms, because they will explode after a second or two of you being stood there. Now, one thing you will have noticed is that he is teleporting around the room at specific intervals throughout the fight. It's not very frequent that he does it, but he will summon these roots out of the ground, and he will then just disappear onto the other side. So yeah, you just need to make sure you're paying attention to where he stood, and keep an eye on those projectiles to make sure you don't get hit by them. Now, he does have one heavy attack, which is this one right here, the big boulder attack. Now, if you're using a shield like I am, you can block that damage. I believe the damage it does is just physical, but if you're not using a shield, I would highly recommend moving out of the way. It will land where you are stood when it starts moving, so you'll notice the boulder come up out of the ground, and then when it starts flying towards you, it will land where you are stood. So make sure you keep moving as to avoid that boulder landing on you, because it does hit pretty hard. And finally, his last main ability is another channeled ability. He will summon up roots from out of the ground, which will summon at your feet and then slam the ground immediately afterwards. I think he summons about 6 or 7 of them, so just make sure you keep moving to avoid being hit by them. Again, they will hit the ground where you were stood when they got summoned, so as long as you've moved slightly since they got summoned up out of the ground, you won't get hit by them. So yeah, just keep moving. That's pretty much most boss fights in Path of Exile 2, is keep moving, don't stand in the nasty stuff on the floor, and you'll be fine. Pretty much World of Warcraft 2.0. But yeah, that is the Rotten Druid. He's not that difficult, as long as you make sure to get out of his ring that he summons around him, or if you get teleported into those mushrooms, to make sure you get out of those, you'll be absolutely fine. And that is the Rotten Druid. Oh, we got very lucky there, and we got a unique ringmail gauntlets. Let's have a quick look at these and see if they're any good for our build. They are armor and evasion base. Strength can satisfy other attribute requirements of melee weapons and melee skills. Oh, very nice. That's not bad at all. So if you wanted to be a pure strength build, but still wanted to use some dexterity supports and some intelligence supports, these gloves would make it so that the requirements for those support gems would be based on your strength and not your intelligence or dexterity. That's really useful. Anyway, that is the Rotten Druid. Thank you all for watching, and we shall catch you in the next episode.